Good morning and welcome to this week, our Monday morning talks. And we're in week 4 of Core 52. Sarah's with me this morning and we're talking about covenants. That's what week 4 was all about. And so for 3 weeks, we talked about God creating, God initiating things, how our identity is found in Him. And then week 4 starts to get into, okay, now sin has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And so
what's next?
God kind of chooses covenant relationships as His way of bringing us all back to Him.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of cool stuff about covenant. We've been sitting here talking about it a little bit. And, the sermon yesterday was a different kind of sermon for me. But I started with the question, what do you think about when I say the word covenant? And the interesting thing is I knew probably not a lot.
Yeah.
It's not a word we use very often. It's not all that common that we make covenants today.
No. I feel like the only time that that I just ever hear it is when I'm at church and we do communion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we talk about Jesus's blood being like the new covenant. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just in every day. That's the only place that I hear it. So.
Well, and there's different places that we've replaced that word.
Yeah.
I think, so that was some of what I talked about. Like one of the words I used in the beginning part of the sermon there was contract.
Right.
That in some ways we've replaced covenants with contracts. They're not the same thing though.
No.
And I talked about a lot of the differences there, but we also, the word promise.
Mm-hmm. Promise
is a really closely related word to covenant. These were promises that God made with people.
But still very different from today, right?
Sure.
Because it's that phrase, like, promises are made to be broken.
Yeah.
Like, so not even...
But it's such an important word for us to understand.
Yeah.
If we really want to understand God through His Word, because, I even brought up, in 2 Kings, the Word is referred to as the book of the covenant.
Yeah.
The Latin word for testament is covenant. So, new covenant, old covenant, like the way it has so much to do with God and His Word and us understanding Him. So,
I think one of the things that I did first when I knew I was going to be on Monday morning talks was I wanted to make sure, just look and see how other people defined it. So I looked it up, and a lot of different just biblical scholars said that there isn't really a good set definition to it. And it kind of went back to your sermon because you said that covenants were personal, but they said there wasn't a good definition because they were all so different, because each covenant is a pretty personal thing. And so we can describe it, but it's hard to actually define it.
Yeah. Yeah. They have such a personal nature. I talked about the differences between them in contracts. Personal covenants are permanent.
Mm-hmm.
They're eternal. They're
right.
Unconditional.
Like
costly.
Yeah. And it's important to know and understand them, because a lot of what God does is through covenants. Like if you're reading, hopefully you're reading your Bible. If you're reading your Bible, you're going to see that word quite often.
Yeah. Well, and so I was trying to think I brought up in the sermon. So one place we probably could encounter that word today is marriage.
Yeah.
Marriage was originally defined as a covenant.
Yeah.
A covenant between you, your spouse, and God. It's kind of a 3-way personal relational promise. And one place I've used it, one place I encountered it, I remember when I went to Lincoln. And I don't know if they still did this when you went or not, but
yeah, we had
to sign a covenant as an agreement when we started as students, like the standard we were going to live by.
Yeah.
As a student at Lincoln. And it was it was personal.
Yeah.
It was also like really, I mean, for a college student, it was pretty strict.
Yeah, it was very specific.
And so similarly, like I thought, probably a lot of people don't know this, but I have a similar thing with our staff here. A covenant that I put together when I moved into this lead position, that I was just like, man, here's something that helps me hold our staff accountable to something. And so we call it our code of ethics. And I revisit it with the staff every year during evaluations, and it talks about all kinds of, all parts of our lives as leaders, as influencers, people who maybe other people are paying extra attention to or watching. And talks about having discipline in our relationship with Jesus, how we handle our calendar. Talks about integrity, being sexually pure, doing our work. All kinds of different things that it deals with. But at the end of it, I actually have it where we sign it. It is a covenant. And it just says, I commit to live by this code of ethics and be an appropriate citizen of our community, realizing that I'm looked at as one in a position of spiritual authority, should be held to a higher standard above reproach. I'm agreeing to make myself accountable to our lead minister and the elders of First Christian Church Moweaqua. I acknowledge that my failure to live by this code could result in closer accountability or even my termination as a minister at First Christian Church. So it's pretty serious.
Big deal.
Yeah. I would say like
a little scary.
we're very slow to ever that word termination to ever even come up, I would say. And I don't say that to say we're soft, but we're definitely about maybe more accountability then, or,
And I mean, it's more, I don't know, I guess it just feels a little more serious because it's called covenant and not like other places you work, you sign contracts. But once again, those can be broken. And I think, I don't know, it just puts more weight on it because it's a covenant.
Yeah. Well, and I think what was really good about or what I was trying to accomplish yesterday, because it was such a different kind of sermon. I am not a 3-point, 4-point, like that's not really my style usually preaching, but I felt like I wanted to teach on what a covenant was, all as background building up to, okay, now here's the text.
Yeah.
And so actually the whole sermon built up to, here's the text. Maybe it'll make more sense now.
Right.
That we know all of these things. And so, what I really wanted to come across through the things I was saying yesterday is like, man, there are two parties involved in every covenant. And so there's the covenant maker, who's God. And God's got a lot invested in his covenants. When he makes these promises and he makes these commitments, I think that's another really strong covenant word, commitment.
Yeah.
The reason it's all of those things, the reason it's personal, the reason it's eternal, the reason it's unconditional, the reason it's costly, that's all on mostly on his part.
Yeah.
He's the one that makes it all of those things. And so that's how we can know he's trustworthy.
Yeah.
To commit to our end of the covenant. Like, God is going to be God. He is going to be consistent. He can be trusted. Like, God can be trusted to do what he says he's going to do. So then what's our part? Yeah. And that was the whole...
Here we are.
Yeah. So that was the whole second half, was talking about like faithfulness then. Mm-hmm. I think my statement was faith is the currency of covenant. That's what we get in it or put in it is faith.
Yeah.
But even there, like, there's a translation struggle that doesn't make a ton of sense if we don't understand it. Because with that, our memory verse for the week.
Yeah.
You want to read it?
Sure. On here, you have Genesis 15:6. Abraham believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness.
Yep. And so it's actually found multiple other places, that exact verse. Mm-hmm. It's in Galatians.
Yeah, and you read it from?
I read it from Romans.
Yeah.
And so, but that whole idea, so Abraham believed God. God counted it to him as righteousness. Like, that word believed is a really bad translation, I think.
Yeah.
It doesn't encompass what it means. Because today for us, I think when we say I believe or I believed something, it doesn't mean the same thing.
No.
Not that it meant when it talks about
not like that.
Abraham. Because, like for me to say, I don't even know how to like best illustrate that. But for me to sit here today and say, I believe in God. Well, okay.
I just feel like it's very vague and not very,
right.
I don't know.
But when you get into like what it meant that Abraham believed God, and that's part of why I went through his story the way I did to tell Abraham's whole story, because it's like Abraham believed God. So he left everything he knew to go someplace that God wanted him to go that he didn't know anything about.
Well, yeah.
So he literally uprooted his life and his family's lives. That's part of it. He also...
Well, yeah, there's several parts of his life are like that, right? Because then, we were talking about just having him and his wife didn't have a baby, but believing in that promise. And even later on in the text, when he finally does have that baby who he loves so much, and then he is asked to sacrifice him, like, that's different than just us saying, like, yeah, I believe in God.
Right.
That's a different level of, it should be a different word. Like you said, it's probably a poor word to just kind of put on there.
Yeah. And so if you go to that definition that I had set up for covenant for us, that this is covenant, a better definition than the dictionary one. Covenant is doing relationships on God's terms.
Yeah.
But it was back to that word hesed, faithful love in action. That's a better idea of what Abraham believed means.
Yeah.
Abraham showed faithful love in action, and God counted it to him as righteousness.
Yeah. That sounds better.
And so, it does sound better, but
it's better.
But at the same time, I think it's just better for people to know that, like, hey, this weak idea we have of what believing is, like, I hate to say it's not enough, but like, it's kind of not enough.
Yeah.
Like, God wants faithful love in action. He doesn't want, yep, God, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I believe you're up there.
I bring it up to the students all the time because, there's always this question, especially with students. I mean, we as adults have it too, but like, what do I need to do to like be okay? Right? Like what is just enough so I don't have to give all of my time or all of my life. And I always bring up when, he says, well, even the demons believe, right? Like even they believe in Jesus and God, but it's the faithful love and action part that sets us apart from that. Like honestly, just saying that you believe is not enough. I don't it says that in the Bible.
So if there's a word we could get at, and I remember we talked about this a lot when we did a series, and it's been unfortunately like longer than I thought. It's been several years ago now. It seemed like it hadn't, but it was probably like 2017-ish. We did a series through the book of John. And when we went through John, I set up from the beginning of John with his gospel, like that there's a word that I felt like I said, it's not the right translation, and we need to set that up from the beginning. And I had gone through and circled it a lot in John, but there's this word, and it's that word, believe. Believe or believed, and over again, that word should be translated faith or faith. So, Abraham faithed in God. Because that's a different, that's bringing in other things. And that's why, if you ever wanted to know, like, why would Ryan stop, or why would any preacher stop in a sermon and give us a Greek lesson on a word?
Yeah.
Ever. It's because of that. Because in their language, a word carried with it so much more weight than words carry for us today.
Yeah.
They just meant so many more things. And our language doesn't appropriately sometimes.
No, I'm definitely like a word nerd. Like,
Yeah.
I love just language, and so many times in my classes, like in college, we talked about how the English language has really like watered down so many words. Like, they were concentrated with all of this meaning, and that's not even biblical classes. Like, that's just language in general, that it's just kind of watered down some of these words so they don't mean the same thing. I mean, we talk about love all the time.
Yep.
Like, I love, my husband. I love my dog. Like, it's the same word.
Yeah.
I love Michigan.
Love's the perfect, it's the
down.
perfect word to look at that way, because so we use one word
Yeah.
for love all the time. In the Greek, they used 4.
Yeah.
It was 4 very different things.
Yeah. And I tell my students anytime, because I do the same thing. I'm like, I know anytime you hear, well, this word in Greek, or, this word in whatever, you start to kind of not listen, because you're like, what's the point? No, there's a lot of point to that. Like, there's a huge reason why we do that.
Yep.
So,
and I didn't bring it with me because I could show you that. And I think that's the thing. We look at this, then we look at what we have in the Bible and go, well, why don't they translate it better then?
yeah.
And the problem is, like, because it would be so much harder to read.
Yeah. It wouldn't make sense.
So it's kind of the compromise, unfortunately,
Watered
that's
down
made
words.
so that we're able to have this because even like the message, Eugene Peterson probably put more effort into trying to do that.
Yeah.
But then if I had the message sitting here next to this, it's like this, and that's not as easy. People aren't going to pop that in their purse or carry that around as easy. And
right.
So it's just, unfortunately, like, that's why we need to study the word. And that's why Core 52 is so important, I think, for us.
Yeah, something just real quick, since we just talked about Core 52, is we're reading Core 52 as a church, but I wanted to make sure I brought this because Core 52 has a student edition. So if your kids are getting into it, they're wanting to follow along, they are very similar. The chapters are very similar, but the language that they use to describe things is different, more geared towards like junior high and high school, and so are the examples when he breaks stuff down. So even I found things that I like in the student edition that maybe talk differently than the adult version. So just a little plug out there for if your kids are wanting to follow along too, but maybe they're needing something a little more geared towards them specifically. So really cool.
Yep. So it's cool. Like, we've given out now like 200 copies.
Wow.
Of Core 50.
Wow.
They're all gone again. And I don't know if we're going to order more right now, or if we're going to just more on an individual basis. Like, if somebody wants the book, we will still help you get it. But there are these other versions of it, and that's why it's probably easier for you to go to Amazon and get, because it's just as easy for you to do that. That's where we got them.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is like, they have a family edition, they have a student edition. So, maybe it's some way that you can engage your kids or your whole family
more
in
like applicable to you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But with covenants, one of the things I like, because, talking even with students, we don't use covenant as a word like in our everyday language. But it's crazy because we know the Old Testament and New Testament. And in the student edition, it says, like, aside from Abraham's, the two most important covenants in the Bible are the Old and New Testament. They pretty much are covenants. And, the first was Moses and the law, and then the second is Jesus and grace. And so it's kind of neat because I think once we talk a little bit more about covenants, it's easier to see, like, oh, this isn't just a scary word that doesn't apply to us anymore. Like, no, we're around it all the time. And God's story is pretty much covenant after covenant. Like Ryan was saying, it's kind of a thread through the Bible, just all these different covenants. So that's
and it was like, there are a lot of promises in Scripture.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things God promises to be and to do. But I think, I don't know, if I was trying to get at like what sets his covenants apart, I would almost go back to Noah and that covenant, because from right there, like continuing the story from where we've been in Core 52 the previous 3 weeks, Adam and Eve, they've sinned, their family fractures, Cain kills Abel.
Yeah.
Sin just is exploding in the world, and it was not what God ever intended or wanted. And so because it's so out of control, God's going to wipe everything out.
Yeah.
And some people look at that and go, man, who is this angry God?
I know. That really bothers me.
That's wiping everything out. And I guess covenant would be the other side of that, is it's like, that's what I told people even when we went through the story. And they were just like, man, God wiped out a lot of people.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it's like, yeah, but why didn't he wipe everyone out?
Yeah.
God, because as creator and because of what people kept agreeing to do and then not fulfilling their end of, like, God would have been justified in wiping everything.
Yeah.
Just
being done or starting completely.
But covenant is what kept him from doing that. He made covenants with people to go, there will still be a remnant of my love in relationship.
Yeah.
So Noah, your family will be saved. And so you look at that and how that foreshadows the new covenant, where God's just like, hey, some people are still going to choose Satan and sin over a relationship with me, but I'm going to make it possible for everyone to be saved.
Yeah.
Like, that's what covenant is about. Covenant is about saying, actually, he's not this angry, terrible God. He's provided truly an easier way for us to be saved and have a relationship with him, instead of being wiped out for eternity.
Yeah, definitely. I always feel bad when we tell that story, because, like, I mean, I know God is God, but I'm like, how heartbroken must have God been to just be like, I don't even know what to, I don't know, just the Noah story. But I wanted to bring up, like, covenants. We don't talk about that word a lot, but we are very familiar with covenants, whether we know it or not, right? Because even in Core 52, it has a list of people who have, like, covenants with God, like Adam, Noah, Abraham, David, of course, Jesus. Like, I think we are more familiar with these than we think we are. It's just, I guess, putting weight on them and seeing how important they are, not only back then and when we're studying, but how important it is, like, that, and they still affect us today, like the covenant with, well, just Jesus dying for us. And I mean, that's something that affects everybody. So kind of cool.
I think if you don't have anything else, I was going to end then just reading this. This is from Matthew 27. And I'm going to read it from the Message, but I think it's God sealing his new covenant. It's the moment that covenant was set up. And, it's Jesus on the cross. It says around mid-afternoon, he groaned out of the depths crying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Some bystanders who heard him said, he's calling for Elijah. One of them ran and got a sponge soaked in sour wine, lifted it on a stick so he could drink. The others joked, don't be in such a hurry. Let's see if Elijah comes and saves him. But Jesus, again, crying loudly, breathed his last. And here's the cool part, so all this is happening and people are mocking him, and it says at that moment, the temple curtain was ripped into top to bottom. There was an earthquake, rocks were split in pieces. What's more, tombs were opened up. And many bodies of believers asleep in their graves were raised. After Jesus' resurrection, they left the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. That's not an angry God. Yeah. That's a God who made a loving covenant, and it cost him dearly to keep it. So, have a good week. And next week, I think Sarah's going to be with me again. We're going to be talking about holiness. And she really liked chapter 5.
I did. I'm excited.
So
I'm excited for you all to read it.
Yep. Have a good week.
Bye.